And now Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House, is in danger of losing her leadership post because she's out of step with the party on the Capitol attack and Trump's role in it. And the rise of Trump loyalists that has led to this rift in the GOP is against this backdrop. A new poll shows 70% of Republicans think President Biden was not elected legitimately. 70%. In any other era, that would be an unthinkable number. Well, they believe this because Republican leaders have been lying, fear-mongering about last year's election results, the election that Biden won fairly and squarely. Last night, I spoke to Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. When the Capitol was attacked by right-wingers and Trump supporters hoping to overturn the election, he was one of the 6 senators who voted against certifying the 2020 Electoral College results for 2 states hours later. And I asked him about the consequences of decisions like that from GOP lawmakers like himself and whether he has any regret. Here's what he said.
It's time to move on. It's time for this country to heal. It's time for a spirit of forgiveness to be happening.
Well, we'd all love to heal. We would all love to move on from this shameful episode of our country. But here's the thing. The reality is Republicans and their followers haven't moved on from the election. Like case in point, the elected officials who enabled it or are complicit with their silence should be held accountable. In Arizona, as you see in this video right here, Republicans are still trying to overturn the 2020 results and fuel paranoia with a partisan audit of ballots after 2 prior audits already found no issues and only confirmed the results, the fact that Trump lost that state. Well, this year, Republicans in almost every single state legislature have introduced new voting restrictions, and they're using lies like rampant voter fraud to justify the measures. And the most powerful Republican, the man who lost the 2020 election, is still ranting to whomever is within earshot at Mar-a-Lago 6 months later, claiming the actual real result of the election he lost will come out any day now.
Let's see what they find. I wouldn't be surprised if they found thousands and thousands and thousands of votes. So we're going to watch that very closely. And after that, you'll watch Pennsylvania and you'll watch Georgia and you're going to watch Michigan and Wisconsin and you're watching New Hampshire. They found a lot of votes up in New Hampshire just now. You saw that because this was a rigged election. Everybody knows it.
Fact check, not true. Just have to say that again. And the same GOP propaganda that led to a deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol, as you see, it hasn't gone away. That is why I challenge every single Republican I have on the show who voted to overturn the election. They don't get to have everyone sing Kumbaya until they stop repeating the same baseless claim that caused this. I'm joined now by CNN chief media correspondent and host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter, and New York University journalism professor Jay Rosen, who has written about this issue. He's been very vocal on Twitter about this issue as well. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks.
So, Brian, first to you, I'm curious what you think as you have watched this play out, how Republicans have been since the election, since the insurrection. Has anything stood out to you about how Republicans have shifted the way they talk about the election and the Capitol attack?
Well, as reality has gotten worse, as it's gotten more damning, more embarrassing, as more indictments have been handed down, as more and more of the rioters have been held accountable, reality must be denied. That's been the approach of the right-wing media, the pro-Trump media, and allies throughout Congress and on Capitol Hill. Deny reality, downplay the riot, pretend it wasn't that bad, pretend this merry band of patriots was just trying to voice an opinion and not try to overturn the election and do damage to this country. That's the attempt. It's getting more flagrant every month. I think it's happening because this is the war on terror party. This is the pro-police party. This is the back the blue party. This is the party that's supposed to stand with the police and against terror, and yet this was a terror attack committed by its members, mostly by its members. That is the fundamental shame that must be extinguished, that must be covered up. And that's what we're seeing. Whether it's stars on Fox News or lawmakers on Capitol Hill. They're trying to somehow extinguish this shame, cover it up, whether they focus on government overreach in particular cases of prosecutions, whether they really emphasize the possibility that Antifa was behind it, which is bull, and we all know that was bull, even the people saying that they know it's bull. But unfortunately, I think, Pamela, it comes down to this attempt to deny reality that's gaining momentum over the months down the memory hole out of shame and embarrassment.
And from a journalist's perspective, you really have to make a decision, right? I mean, there's three buckets here. You can choose not to have these elected Republicans on, give them a platform. You can choose to give them the platform, but also challenge them on how they enabled or were complicit with silence with the big election lie and the insurrection. Or you can have them on and, of course, not bring it up at all. On that, Jay, what do you think should happen? I mean, you heard my guest last night, the Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, say it's time to move on. What is the appropriate way for the media to handle this, you think?
Well, I think one thing that people in your business ought to do is make a hierarchy among the 147 Republicans who in some way or another voted to overturn the election, who are the most serious deniers of reality in the election versus the least, and perhaps have different policies for them. I think you have to have a discussion within each organization, within each show, about what is our policy. Do we invite and confront? Do we not allow them on the air until they have disavowed their original views? The one thing that isn't doable is denial, which has been practiced, I think, by the media as well as so many Republican politicians, as Brian said. When Senator Rick Scott can just waltz on to ABC News, George Stephanopoulos this week, and face zero questions about Stop the Steal and his vote to decertify the results in Pennsylvania, that's a kind of denial among the media class. I don't think that does anybody any good. But to pull the camera back a little bit, Pamela, we have a two-party system, and one of the two parties is anti-democratic. The routines and assumptions of mainstream political journalism aren't built for that situation. And the real problem is not just these kinds of questions of what to do about Stop the Steal politicians. It's what do we do when we have a two-party system and one of the two parties is anti-democratic? I don't think our press has started to grapple with that yet.
What do you think, Brian? I know this is something that you've thought about, you've written about as well.
Well, Pamela, I think you deserve credit for not letting go of this. I think State of the Union, its bookings, Jake Tapperty and Abash have thought a lot about how to, handle this issue with Republican lawmakers who were a part of this anti-democratic movement. It is fundamentally true that we're in this battle, as Biden has said, about democracy versus autocracy. It's one of the stories of our time. And there's lots of ways to cover that story. But to pretend like it's not happening is the worst way. And that's what I worry about when I watch Fox and Newsmax and OAN, and they've moved on entirely from the riot and essentially acted like it didn't happen. Can you imagine those channels in 2001? Right behind me is the rebuilt World Trade Center, right in this monitor behind me. But to think about those networks in early 2002 pretending that the towers hadn't been taken down by terrorists, obviously what happened on January 6th of a different magnitude. Thank God, a lower magnitude. But we saw this embarrassing invasion of our own seat of power by extremists within our own country. Mm-hmm. It's something that folks don't want to think about because it's so embarrassing, it's so uncomfortable, it's so frightening. And I wonder sometimes how the folks at these right-wing networks, how are they comfortable ignoring it? How are they comfortable ignoring this threat to democracy? I don't know is the honest answer, Pamela.
But it's so interesting. They're ignoring that, and yet they're still pushing GOP propaganda about,
right,
the big election lie. I mean, that's the thing. You saw it. I mean, you're seeing it play out in Arizona with this audit going on. And, Jay, I've talked to some Republican officials, politicians privately, who say they don't want to go near this issue. They say it's like the third rail. They know Biden was legitimately elected, but if they say so publicly, they will just get hammered by their constituents and their political career would end in their mind. We have seen that play out publicly to an extent with Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, and others. So, by journalists ignoring this issue and not bringing it up, are you just giving Republicans who don't want to be held accountable for what's happening in their party exactly what they want? I mean, as you've seen on this show, I've chosen to put it out there, invite Republicans on, but hold them accountable. What do you think about staying silent, Jay?